Hello Year 8 and welcome to your next lesson on Britain 1750 to 1900, the Great Inventors. So, can you write down the title and the aim, and then we've got a starter activity that relates back to what you've done previously, particularly the first lesson of this topic. So what I want you to do, pause the video, and then I want you to write a 5-minute paragraph. And basically I want you to describe what the main changes were between 1750 and 1900. So if you look on the guidance, it gives you some ideas. So we expect it to start with one of the main changes between 1750 and 1900 was this changed by, and explain the change. Then go on to your next one, another change was, and this changed by, and ideally you should do a third major change. So if you can pause this video and then take 5 minutes to write your brief paragraph describing the main changes to Britain between 1750 and 1900. And this is one of the tasks we want you to resubmit back into Google Classroom so we can mark it. So pause the video now. So, one of the most significant changes and one of the drivers of this industrial revolution in Britain, one of the most prominent changes across these industrial towns were factories and mills, and here are two examples on the screen in front of you. Textiles made in these mills became the backbone of Britain's industrial revolution. These mills and factories could produce huge amounts of material much quicker and much cheaper than traditional methods, and as a result they also employed thousands of workers. Now, because Britain became one of the first nations to be able to do this, it allowed them to effectively corner the market on textiles for definitely all of Europe, if not most of the world. And there's two main strands. So the top picture you see is Quarrybank Mill. This is just down the road from Parrs Wood. And this was so prominent in Manchester that it became known as Cottonopolis. Obviously, Manchester then, as a result, has emerged on the back of the slave trade, the cotton being grown in the US, shipped by slaves, shipped over to Britain, and then turned from raw cotton into textiles in cities particularly like Manchester. The image below that is Lister's Mill in Bradford. Bradford is one of the cities that took the different route to using cotton. Bradford was massively involved in creating textiles from wool rather than cotton. So the wool was grown locally, if not in Europe, shipped to places like this mill in Bradford and processed into material. So this is why these two cities particularly became huge industrial centres in this period. So the next thing we need to consider is, how did this happen? It's not like all of a sudden people suddenly started being able to turn raw material like cotton and wool into huge amounts of material. There are many factors behind the growth of the textile industry in Britain, but if we focus specifically on textiles, one very important factor for this development is certain individuals and their inventions. So technology was very important in driving this change through. So throughout the period, engineers, inventors and industrialists continually tried to come up with, and did come up with, new machines to make production quicker and easier. So the quicker you could make the more material, the cheaper it was, and the more profit you could ultimately make. And these people are going to be the focus of this lesson, these great inventors. So here is your first proper task of the lesson. It's gathering information. So I've suggested about 20 minutes to do this task. You will have uploaded some information called information sheets and a data capture sheet. The data capture sheet looks like the chart on the top. The details filled in for you already are simply the dates. You need to complete the rest. So you're looking at finding as much key detail as possible for each one. So we're looking at the inventor, the invention, the advantages of this invention, but also think about some of the disadvantages of this invention. So for example, things like size, does it require other things to work, or so on. So pause the video now, take about 20 minutes to try and complete that data capture sheet as fully as possible. And this is the second task we'd like you to re-upload back to Google Classroom so we can assess this. So just as a quick review, you don't necessarily have to write or submit anything for this. These are more thinking points. So the first thing we'd obviously look at is, can you spot any patterns with these various inventions? Do they follow a pattern? Are there commonalities? Then one thing we will need to do before the end is, do you think one invention had more impact than others? Was the one that you think changed Britain the most? And the other thing, can you think of how any of these machines influence later development? So can you spot, for example, a pattern or an idea or a piece of technology used in an early invention that crops up later on? Is it simply that these later machines are just copying and improving the earlier machines? These are important questions to think about for the next task. And following on from that last little review point, we now need to start thinking about ranking these machines. So you now need to think about and decide which invention you think was the most important or the most influential in changing textile production. And we're going to do this as a diamond ranking activity. So you'll need to draw a diamond, taking up quite a bit of room. If you're doing it in your book, take up a full page. You need to place each invention in the diamond where you think it should go. So for example, the most influential at the top, the least influential at the bottom. There's some room in the middle if you're not entirely sure whether one is better than the other. But what is important for each invention, where you place it, you need to explain your reason. Why is the machine at the top at the top? Why is the one at the bottom at the bottom? So you need to pause the video and complete that task, and then again re-upload this task to Google Classroom. If you are feeling particularly comfortable with this and feeling a bit brave, can you include the details from the export values that's on your information sheet in these explanations? So could you argue that one machine increased the export value, so the amount of material sold, to how influential it was? So pause the video. It's a diamond ranking activity, some of which you have done many in your 2 years in humanities. So can you now rank the machines in terms of influence and importance, and then submit it to Google Classroom? And finally, just as a little summary review, at the bottom, or at the top really is probably better, can you just write a little statement just to further emphasize which inventor and which invention you think was the best? Do try actually, rather than just comparing it to the other machines, can in this answer you explain why it was the best in terms of what it did to change Britain? Thank you very much, and until the next lesson, goodbye.